This is Reimagining the Bridge, Recruiting and Advising Humanities and Social Science Transfer Students. My name is Jesse Carr, and I'll be moderator and timekeeper for this panel. I'm the project coordinator for the Transfer Bridges to the Humanities program at Michigan, which you are about to hear a lot more about. Our presenters today include, and they'll each reintroduce themselves again before they speak, but our presenters today include Lorraine Paffenroth, Manager of Academic Advising and Student Success at Henry Ford College in Dearborn, Bridget Smith-Botos and Sherry Clippard-DeVogel, who are both academic advisors at Henry Ford College, Nick Turinsky, who's the Transfer Recruitment Coordinator at the University of Michigan, and Laura Herbert and Tiffany Browne, who are both academic advisors at the University of Michigan. And before we launch into the actual presentation, I just want to offer a little bit of background and context. The project we'll be describing today is funded by a grant from the Mellon Foundation that supports partnerships between community colleges and research-intensive universities. And so this particular partnership is between Henry Ford College in Dearborn and the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Our goal is to identify effective practices that can be institutionalized in the future for other community colleges around the state of Michigan. And our project is aimed at addressing two challenges. The first one is that in contrast with a lot of other states, such as California and Florida, that have more kind of standardized articulation agreements, Michigan does not have something like that. And the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor has been particularly slow to develop articulation agreements. So a lot of transfer students have to go on a kind of course-by-course, department-by-department, institution-by-institution basis to figure out what will transfer. And the second challenge we're trying to address is that we know that transfer student success goes deeper than just the on-paper articulation agreement. So we're trying to figure out co-advising systems, co-recruitment systems that will provide more of a seamless transfer, both academically and socially, when students move between institutions. So one of the reasons that we like to have this pilotship model is that we can be very tailored to our respective institutional contexts, but we're also looking for those best practices that will transfer elsewhere. Finally, I want to note that this presentation focuses on advising and recruitment. You can see from the brochures on your seats, and if you didn't get one, there's some extras right behind the projector, that there's a bunch of other components of the Transfer Bridges program that we won't talk about today, but you can learn more about from the brochures that involve co-curricular alignment and institutional policy reform. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our academic advising team, who will give some background on key characteristics of our respective institutions, starting with Laura Herbert.
And do you want to click for me? Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Laura M. Herbert. I'm a general academic advisor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I work specifically in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. I'm going to kick us off today by giving you all a little bit of context about our current undergraduate student population. And to do this, I've snagged a really great graphic from our Office of Undergraduate Admissions. It's a snapshot of our 2019 entering class, and you'll see we've divided it into two groups. You probably can't see it, the writing's very small, but we've got transfer students down here and freshman students down here who should be understood as FIDIAC students or first time in any college. These blue bars represent the total number of applications that we received for both groups. In gray, you'll see the number of positions offered within each of those groups. And finally, within yellow, the number of positions that were accepted by students who then entered our university. And what you'll probably take away from this graph are a couple of things. The first one is we're a highly selective institution. We're a very academically rigorous program, something that really serious students are excited to be a part of. You'll also notice we are overwhelmingly serving FIDIAC students. And so while we're aggressively recruiting community college students, which you're going to hear about in a minute, we're set up to serve a more traditional student body. We don't have a lot of online classes. We have very few evening classes. Most of our students are enrolled full-time. Very few of those students have families. And so we're having to really think strategically about how can we support a different kind of student, how can we be an appealing choice to them, and what can we do to make them feel secure in choosing our university as the next step in their academic careers. Now I'm going to hand things off to Tiffany.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Browne, and I am also a general academic advisor at the University of Michigan for the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. What I'm going to share with you is a bit of demographic information about the racial and ethnic makeup of our student population. So it's really important to cover these numbers because when we think about community colleges, traditionally we see those as spaces that are more ethnically and racially diverse than the University of Michigan campus. As we work to admit more students from community college campuses, in theory, we're also going to be increasing the diversity on our campus. With that, we have to pay attention to the unique needs of those student populations. So as you can see by this chart, also snagged from our Office of Undergraduate Admissions, like many other highly selective, large research institutions, our students primarily identify as white or Caucasian. That's this big blue space here. About 58.2% of our students identify in this way. The other 48.1% of our students are identifying with one or more racial or ethnic minority groups. What this chart doesn't point out, and something that is interesting that started on our campus in 2017, was a student-led movement called We Exist. And the purpose of that movement was to bring visibility and attention to the roughly 4% of students on our campus who identify as Middle Eastern or North African. The U.S. Census Bureau, as some of you may know, categorizes peoples from the Middle East and North Africa as white. So that particular group of students is not adequately reflected in this chart, and that point is particularly relevant considering our work that we do with Henry Ford College, which you'll hear about in just a moment.
All right, so my name is Bridget Smith-Bodis, and one of the things you'll notice when we look at our student profile is that our campus is identified as 57% white, but that's where we need to take a time out. Many of you have heard of Dearborn, Michigan, right? We like to make the news a lot. People who don't live in Dearborn like to come to Dearborn. And they like to make generalizations. We have a very large population of Arab Americans. In fact, we have the highest concentration of Arab Americans, which means those people are not necessarily reflected in these statistics. So most of them tend to identify as white because that's how the U.S. Census identifies them. But you'll also notice, you'll see about 16% state race and ethnicity unknown. And what we do know is that students who are immigrants or more recent arrivals, particularly those who may be a little more dark-skinned, are less likely to check the white category. So when you look at our student profile, it's not a very accurate statement, and we'll return to this idea a little bit later on. The other thing I want you to take away from our demographics is that we have a lot more non-traditional students. So around 12,000 students, 52% of our students are 21 and older, and 67% of our students are part-time. So you can see just how different our two institutions are in terms of student makeup. And I'm going to hand it over now to Lorraine, who's going to talk about our admissions process.
My name is Lorraine Paffenroth, and I am the Manager of Academic Advising and Student Success at Henry Ford College. Henry Ford College is an open admission 2-year institution, which means any student who has graduated from high school or has a GED will be accepted into our institution. As Bridget said, we do have a large number of international students that attend our school, and most of those students have been educated overseas. Most of our Arab American students are from Lebanon. Those students tend to be highly educated and do very well on their admission test placement for math and English. Many of them come to us with previously earned degrees, whether a bachelor's degree or master's degree, even from a Arab-based university. That presents a lot of barriers for our students. Not all those credits will transfer. Sometimes transcripts are impossible to obtain because the school or the community that they grew up in or lived in no longer exists. So those are some big concerns. Each group brings their own different characteristics to the process. So we have to be careful in terms of how we work with these students to make sure that they're transferring to Henry Ford in a reasonable and equitable way. And it's Nick.
Is it the button?
Oh, there we go. So my name is Nick Turinsky. I am the transfer recruiting coordinator in the College of Literature, Science, and Arts at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. When we launched this grant in July 2018, when the recruitment team was looking at it, we noticed that it was on a 3-year timeline, but there was no planning year allowed in the timeline. So we kind of were like, so we're just going to show up at Henry Ford College, and we assume students are going to come to this program that we don't even know about. So not quite great. So we said time out. We said we're going to actually do a planning year. So while we got the grant in July 2018, we actually didn't launch, we didn't open the application up until July 1st, 2019, so just about 6 months ago. So in that meantime, in that first year, we said we had really 3 core strategies for a recruitment purpose. One, let's get to Henry Ford College. Let's have as many conversations with the faculty, staff, and students as we possibly can. Anyone who was willing to listen to us and connect with us, not just those that were connected with the grant. We tried to extend our hand to every single person. And we were really hoping to understand the campus climate better and get a better feel for it. So that's kind of where our second strategy was implement effective recruitment strategies based off of the campus climate that we saw that would be conducive to the student population at Henry Ford College. Once we got to know the students, we thought, okay, it's go time. Let's start developing some TB2H documents like the application, the brochures, the program agreement, and then let's go. So over the next couple slides, over the next couple minutes, I'm going to go over each of these 3 different strategies that we came up with. So in year 1, like I said, July 2018 to July 1st, 2019, our first step, and I apologize, it's out of order, that was my fault. Our first step was really solidifying some TB2H marketing. We wanted to have a consistent brand and plaster it all over Henry Ford College, so that when students and faculty and staff see it, they know it's connected, it's a partnership, a bridge program, connected between Henry Ford College and U of M. So we came up with the TB2H logo, which you saw at the beginning and which you can kind of see there. The important part was making sure both institutions were represented in the branding. So as you can see, Henry Ford College is over there on the right side, and that is their school, one of their school colors. And then it's a roadmap over to the College of LSA at the University of Michigan. Once we had this marketing solidified, we, again, like I said, we plastered it on everything. We had a tablecloth made with that specific branding. It says Transfer Bridges to the Humanities. We had t-shirts made, as we're modeling off right now, as you can see, with the logo, and then tote bags as well. We did floor banners, and then with that new branding, like I said, we put it on some half sheets of paper and said, U of M Ann Arbor is here, and then which gets us into our next point, Michigan Mondays, and so that every student knew who we were and what we were about. So going off of Michigan Mondays, we all agreed that we needed to be on campus at Henry Ford College every week on a consistent basis. So we agreed that Mondays were the best because alliteration, Michigan Mondays. So from 8 to 5, students know that I am located in the lobby of the Liberal Arts Building and just sitting there to answer any questions. It's not just for humanities and social science students. I answered every question possible, whether it was the College of Engineering, the Ross School of Business. It's open to all students. I didn't turn anyone away, just to get our name out there. So those are the 2 things we did at Henry Ford College specifically to start ramping up the TB2H program. So then we thought, well, it's not just Henry Ford College students that were current Henry Ford College students that we're really focused on. We need, Henry Ford College is a big part of the Metro Detroit community, so we need to go with them into the community. So we did 2 things. One was the TB2H information session. So we hosted one in October and one in April, and we still do this once a semester. They are open to the general public. I work closely with the admissions office at Henry Ford College. His name's Jeremy Guck, and so he sends out these invites to all of his partners in the community. It's an hour-and-a-half session each semester that we talk about the College of LSA, how to transfer, credit transfers, TB2H as a whole, and what you can do with the program, and just a mix and mingle so you can get to know U of M partners and Henry Ford partners. Yeah, and then our last one was, because I work so closely with the Henry Ford admissions counselors, we sat down one day and we decided that I was going to tag along with them to 12 local high schools in the Metro Detroit area. So in those visits, I would present to juniors and seniors with our admissions counselors from Henry Ford and tell them that it is an option to come to Henry Ford College for 2 years, get your associate's degree in a humanities or social science major, and then transfer to the University of Michigan. So we do this about once a year. We're slated to go at the end of this year. So those are just 2 ways we've been in the community. So after we did all this, it was crunch time. We knew that we needed to develop an application that was suitable for the students' needs at Henry Ford College. So the application, this is not how it looks. It's just kind of screenshot, so I apologize. It's not beautiful. So with the application, we made it pretty simple. So basically, as you can see, it's your first name, last name, Henry Ford College email, phone number, preferred method of contact. On the right side, it's your current major of interest, how many credit hours you have so far, preferred year you'd want to transfer to the University of Michigan College of LSA. We asked 2 questions. Why are you interested in joining TB2H? And most students have had conversations with me about the program. And what else would you like us to know about you? So like I said, we had these conversations for a year with students, even knowing that the application was not opening for a full year. So we had quite a few students in the queue waiting to go. So most students were ready and knew why they wanted to join TB2H, and they had some fun facts about themselves. One important area that I have to share is we constantly make sure that students are aware that their information is being shared between Henry Ford College and the University of Michigan. So that's that question on the bottom right there, and then we do talk about that quite frequently. So once the students submit their application, it's in Qualtrics, so once they submit their application, I get a notification and I set up an appointment with them to go over the program agreement to make sure they understand what Transfer Bridges is about. So this is just, I'm not going to go over each bullet point in the program agreement, just some important highlights of this. So one of the unique factors about our program is that we are not a guaranteed admit program. So just, even if you are part of the TB2H program, you are not guaranteed admissions. However, if you open up that brochure that we have, it says Transfer Bridges to the Humanities. There is a roadmap that goes through the entire brochure. At the very end, there are 8 or 9 co-curricular departments that are active at Henry Ford College. We tell students that if you interact with us at Henry Ford College and you do as much as you possibly can, you will be a competitive applicant just by being part of the Wolverine community before you even apply to the University of Michigan. So the program agreement, this was decided upon between Henry Ford College, our partners, and the University of Michigan. So like I said, so it's not a guaranteed admit. They get guidance through the admissions process. It's basically something that, it's not a contract. Students have the leeway to do whatever they want. They're not committed to U of M. We still help them explore other universities if they want. But it is just a guiding factor for them. It's what they can expect from us and what we can expect from them. In addition to that, so before I do the recruitment takeaways, so there's this document right here. This was our pathways document that we give to all students that were admitted to TB2H. So it's important to know, really quick, a side note, that if a student submitted a TB2H application that wasn't a humanities or social science major, we will still work with them. They just won't be part of our tracking system under our document. They're still welcome to come to our workshops if they're applicable. We don't turn them away, but they're just not under our tracking system that we use. But again, I will work with them until they apply to the University of Michigan and beyond. So this is the pathways document that all of our students get once admitted to TB2H. So as you can see, it's 3 pages, so I'm just going to go over this fairly quickly. So the first part is, it's called the research phase. So it's great, you want to go to University of Michigan, but we also encourage some other options about let's explore other universities and see if maybe interests line up elsewhere, and we can work on that. The second part is the application process, and it's tips on the application process, how we help you through that, and what you should be considerate of. And the third part is the post-application process. So we still help you after you've been admitted or maybe not been admitted. We will still work with you on where you want to go and explore those various factors. On the bottom of that sheet, it's a blank space for the Henry Ford College. I purposely deleted them, I apologize, but we put important contacts in that box. So students have that, and then there's our contacts in the bottom at the U of M box as well. So on the second page is a checklist of areas we want our students to hit in various months. So ranging from academic advising, when registration opens, when the application opens and closes. So it's important benchmarks we want them to hit throughout the academic year. And the third page is our list of our TB2H events. So we at U of M come in every month and we host some type of workshop at Henry Ford College. So we make sure that we're constantly ingrained in the college campus. So the students receive this in August or whenever they join TB2H. They know well in advance of when the events are coming to campus. So some takeaways from the recruitment. So like I said, we opened the application on July 1st, 2019. As of February 4th, we have 28 students that have joined since the launch. My personal goal was 15 students for the whole year, so I was quite pleased when we reached 28 just last month. One thing I will say that as we go through this program, it's a lot of trial and error. We have made a lot of mistakes, some things haven't worked, but that's kind of the bonus of doing this program is that we have some leeway and we can explore different programs to help these students further. So one thing that's really helped me with our current DB2H students is consistent and constant communication. So every month I email each student individually. It's not a general email, it's a specific email saying, how are you doing, what can we help with, have you done some workshops, have you seen our wonderful academic advisors? So they know that it's a personal connection with us that they have with the University of Michigan. So once they are in and they get all these documents and they do all this recruitment stuff, the next part of that bridge or that roadmap, like we have, is really to refer them to our academic advisor so they can plan their courses accordingly and make sure that their credits are transferable. So now I'm going to hand it over to them.
Okay. Hi, everyone. All right, so before we get started talking about the role of advising, I'm going to offer a little bit of an origin story about our participation on the grant. As Nick said, it was maybe a hastily written grant by some really fabulous PIs, but it didn't have a planning year. Tiffany and I didn't get added to the grant until the end of the de facto planning year. And we were told by our assistant dean that we were supposed to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what stuck, which is sort of a loose charge. And we interpreted that to mean that we were supposed to think about how advising could support transfer students both before and after and provide some kind of wraparound support. Tiffany and I were both pretty new to transfer. As advisors, we'd worked with students at their orientation, tried to help them graduate when they were at the University of Michigan, but we weren't particularly aware or well-versed in transfer literature. And so we tried to think about, how do we get involved? What do we do? And we were looking around for a little bit of guidance. And the first thing we bumped into was this grant was incredibly decentralized. It encompassed many units across 2 sprawling campuses. There was not a coordination plan. People weren't necessarily talking to one another or coordinating. Nick is probably the one exception to that rule. He was constantly running interference between our 2 teams. And we weren't even sure what was happening on our own campus. This was a real problem for us as advisors because advisors, by and large, were super connectors. Our job is to help students map out their academic journey and also connect them to the resources and opportunities on either campus so that they can best pursue their academic and intellectual interest and also get to maybe that career goal or future goal for after they're done with their time in higher ed. So we were really asking ourselves, and the other question that we came up with, as super connectors, we didn't know where the students were or how we were supposed to be connecting to them or meeting with them. Nick eventually set up this wonderful recruitment system, and hopefully they're going to be coming and talking to us. But we also wanted to talk with students before ourselves and try to figure out what their questions were, what kinds of materials we needed to be developing, those sorts of things.
So in order to address those 2 questions, what I'm going to walk you all through is our 5 W's of informational interviewing. Now, I just want to point out, as a former English major, I know these are out of order and it's driving me nuts, but please bear with me because there's a method to my madness. So the first W that I'll take you all through is our what. And our what was informational interviewing. We are sure that you are all very familiar with the concept of informational interviewing at this point, but our specific goal with informational interviewing was to learn more about how we could best collaborate with our grant partners and other transfer practitioners on both campuses, which segues very well into our who. So who are those grant partners and transfer practitioners? We first started out with the High Impact Practices group, which is where advising is settled within our grant. It's made up of the advising team, our colleagues at our LSA Opportunity Hub, our colleagues in Optimize, our colleagues in Recruitment, and then the kind of overarching project coordinators. We work with Jesse a lot as well. And there were some aspects of those groups that we weren't super familiar with. So what we did was organize meetings with over 15 grant partners and transfer practitioners on our campus and at Henry Ford. We met with folks in admissions. We talked with folks in new student orientation. We talked with recruitment on both campuses. And of course, our colleagues over in advising. The where of this process is really thinking about whose campus or office you're going to be having those meetings in. And that's the important part for us, is getting to the community college campus like Nick was talking about. We know that there are differences in the cadence and the workflow for 2-year institutions versus 4-year institutions, and we wanted to be really cognizant of that as we were beginning this partnership. So we dedicated the time to go to the HFC campus, see where their students are, what do the offices look like that they're working in, because the structure is really different than it is in Ann Arbor. The other thing I should mention about that, as Laura said, there were some things that we didn't really know that were happening on our campus as well. So when the opportunities presented themselves, we went to those spaces that we were less familiar with, and we invited folks who are a little bit less familiar with our space to come and meet with us there as well. The when of this process is the thing that I can't stress enough, and it's early. As we mentioned, the planning year was a little bit different for this grant, but the earlier you can gather this type of information and start building these solid relationships, the better you can utilize those relationships to move forward. So once we were able to establish those relationships, we were able to create more tangible interventions to support our students. Finally, our why. Why did we do all of this? As Laura mentioned, we're super connectors as advisors. If we can't make good referrals, we're not doing our job well. And by going and meeting with folks, being able to give a warm handoff saying, call Bridget or Lorraine or Sherry or walk into their advising center. I can pick up the phone and talk to someone in financial aid that I know by name and refer the student to that person. It just makes the whole process a lot more efficient as well.
All right, so now we're going to offer a couple of takeaways from this first part of advising. The first is you have to share expertise. You can't be everything to everybody, and the best thing you can do is try to figure out who knows the most about something and how you can collaborate and work together to best serve your students. The second is to really think about how you're going to manage decentralization. For us, what we found was meeting regularly was the single best way to do this. Emails are great, but we all have really full inboxes. It's pretty easy to ignore stuff. But now, just because we've met with the advisors at HFC, I open their emails, I respond promptly. And I do feel like I can pick up the phone and say, hey, this student is telling me this. How did this work on your campus? How can I better serve them? And they're able to give me an informed response instead of me searching online for 30 minutes and giving something that's sort of right. Two, you need to have a plan for information sharing. At U of M, we were stranded without a project coordinator for some time. Jessie has since taken on that role and been such a blessing for us. But if you can think strategically about how are we updating each other, how are we not duplicating our efforts on the other's campus, how can we coordinate and maybe have advising and recruitment work together so that we're not accidentally stepping on each other's feet when we don't mean to be. And last, really anticipating student disorientation. I think one thing that was so eye-opening for me was even though I'd served students or worked with students when they were going through their orientation, I didn't really understand how many offices they were being told to go to and what that would feel like and how easily something would slip through the cracks. And so I think realizing and being very deliberate in how you respond to students and not just offering them, here's a list of 20 offices that you go to, check off the box, but trying to think about how do we coordinate these steps, how do we coach them in an appropriate manner and make sure that things actually happen.
Okay. Last but not least, we want to stress the importance of finding your natural partners. Like I mentioned before, we met with over 15 different offices on our 2 different campuses, and we learned a lot of really valuable information and have great connections, and we're not duplicating efforts, instead we're enhancing them. But we really needed to find the folks who were kind of going to be our foil on the HFC campus. And what we found was that pairing was, of course, our advising team over at HFC. So I'm going to hand it over to them for the second half of the presentation.
Okay, so I asked our advising team to tell us some of the unique challenges that our students face. Your students all have their own challenges, and so if we're trying to build a transfer pathway, we really need to understand what is going on our campus and what are some potential barriers. So I'm not going to go over everything, but some things that you'll notice and things that your students probably can relate to. We have a high refugee population. We also have issues with homelessness, but we also have DACA. We also have a high Muslim population, and so prejudice is an issue for our students. And so when we look at transfer, perhaps one of the most subtle things that we have to think about is culture. And in the Arab American culture in our area, the expectation is that you're going to stay at home and live at home until you get married. And this is actually true for both men and women, particularly with women. But Ann Arbor's an hour away, which may not seem that far, but U of M hasn't traditionally been set up as a commuter school, right? It's an elite institution. So as we're working with helping our students, many of our students haven't even thought of going to the University of Michigan. It hasn't even been a blip on their radar. So as advisors, through our appointments, how do we bring that to their attention? So I wanted to share some challenges that we have had. One of our biggest things is what can you guys take away from this to your own institutions? So the time commitment, As they mentioned, having time, pre-planning time before you launch this would be really helpful. Advising, in our campus, they were trying to decide, does this go to counseling or advising? It did wind up coming to advising kind of in the 11th hour, so we're kind of playing catch up a little bit as we go. Also, we've dealt with decentralization. So you have two large academic institutions who have tendencies to operate in silos, trying to work together. So it became quite problematic. Some of us didn't even get copies of the grant until a year or so into the launch. And then logistics. This is something you really need to think about that we didn't pay enough attention to. We thought it would be easy and beneficial for students to make their own appointments during peak registration. So let me tell you how that worked out. Tiffany and Laura came over, and we are doing co-advising. So they're helping to plan classes at Henry Ford to make sure that they're going to lead to U of M. Well, what they figured out, I think in the first or second appointment, was that they were coming for Henry Ford advising, and they didn't read the name or the fact that it says U of M next to their name. So we had trusted students to plan their own appointments and then also to read, which we know students are really awesome at doing. The other thing is we don't have consistent calendars. So as a community college, we offer 15, 12, and 8-week courses. So we're always registering really, except for February. Yay. Well, we still have 8 weeks. But anyway, we're almost not registering now. So having to coordinate those two schedules. And then with this co-advising, we thought, let's use a computer lab. That makes sense because we can both be on our computers. They can be looking at U of M stuff. We can be looking at Henry Ford stuff. Except we did it in the orientation lab that has essentially bar stools. And so if you're sitting for 8 hours in bar stools, you're going to develop back problems. And so things like that just didn't even cross our minds. So here are some takeaways that we took from that. Plan at appropriate time. Give yourself a semester in advance. Also build in blocks of time without students. So a lot of us try to get things done in between student appointments. This kind of work that requires a lot more thinking and a lot more strategic planning than that. So make sure you're blocking away time. I know we had to turn down some other commitments to be able to be effective in this. Make sure all parties are informed. When we finally did ask for copies of the grant, it was a light bulb moment. The person who had it never occurred to them to send it to us. And it wasn't that it was being withheld, it just never clicked that maybe the people on the ground needed that information. And then the biggest thing, remember they're students. Okay? They don't always read things. Make sure that's clear. So when it comes to appointment making, we've actually had to install they're going to come to us as Henry Ford advisors, and then we'll do the referral, just because we love that they drive over from Ann Arbor, but when they're driving over from Ann Arbor for 2 real appointments and the rest are Henry Ford students, that's not a good use of anybody's time. And then don't assume they know things, okay? So I'm going to hand this off to my colleague Sherry, who's going to kind of talk about some of the more specifics.
Hello, my name is Sherry Clippard, and I'm going to keep my notes here. 12 and a half hours and 600 miles has kind of affected me. So we know that our 2-year schools are just losing students, hundreds of thousands of students every day. And they're leaving without a credential or without a degree. And so this is a problem for 2-year schools. And we need to keep that in mind with this project that we're working on with LSA at U of M Ann Arbor. So we want to look at degree applicable versus transferable credit. Okay, so when students come into TB2H, well, you saw that Nick had the slide up there, the students commit to completing an associate's degree at Henry Ford College. So what this means is that some of those courses do and do not transfer, and that's where the problems lie. We're going to be talking about the liberal arts program, the Associate of Arts at Henry Ford College. There are 60 credit hours of degree-specific credits that need to be met, that have to be met. And for example, our first semester writing course, which is the prerequisite for our second semester writing course, does not transfer. So the second semester transfers, but the first semester doesn't. So then how do you deal with that? Well, there's the option of completing English composition in high school, an AP class, and then taking the exam and transferring that in, or possibly CLEPing Other than that, you're going to take the class, you're not going to get the credit for it, and it's not going to transfer. Now, that's not the only class. So we have many of our online classes, especially in math and sciences, they do not transfer to LSA. So actually, the goal we have to keep in mind is just identifying early on any student that wants to transfer into the TB2H program. Other classes that don't transfer are college algebra. That meets a math requirement for liberal arts, but that doesn't transfer. So the safest option is to always recommend that the student take statistics. Statistics transfers seamlessly over to LSA. Another degree requirement that we have in our liberal arts program, and many of our programs at two-year schools, is a computer literacy requirement. That's in our case, it's a CIS 100. That course does not transfer. You will not get a degree from our school without having that requirement met. They have implemented a test that you can take, but so far it's the feedback that I've gotten is that it's a very challenging test, and most students haven't been successful. So I brought today a case study of an actual student that sat down at my desk in the fall of 18. TB2H just started the program, remember, in July of 2018. And this student, and I wasn't even aware of it yet because that's how late we came into the project. But this student sat down and he said, you know, I want to transfer to University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Really, up until this point, those were scary words coming out of a student, you know, to us in our offices, because the transfer guides were difficult to navigate. We didn't have any relationships with U of M Ann Arbor, but right across the parking lot, we have U of M Dearborn. And the requirements for U of M Dearborn are very different from the requirements of University of Michigan Ann Arbor. They found that kind of funny when they first started coming over because we'd have to identify them. University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. What? What? Because when we say U of M on our campus, people think that we're talking about U of M Dearborn. But maybe you remember the 7 habits of highly effective people. That's what we had to keep in mind because this student knew exactly what he wanted to do. And I bring this up because even with all the I's and with walking him through every semester. And this student finished 3rd grade. He's a United States citizen. He finished 3rd grade in the United States, but then his parents moved him back to Lebanon, and he didn't come back until after high school. So that required he had to take a CAMLA test. A CAMLA is for our non-first language speaking students. I don't know why he fell into that category, but you know, that's policies of schools, right? So he had to start out, as you see with, maybe you can't see, but in developmental reading and writing. But he was very strong in science and math. And so the honors program recognized him right away. And so he got pulled into honors by the winter semester. And you can see that he is a 4.0 student, just a dream come true for an advisor. But when developing this presentation, I was doing this on Martin Luther King Day, and I said, oh my goodness, this student, he will have applied for graduation for winter 2020. This student would be denied graduation. Why? Because of our very specific degree requirements. This student was pulled in by our faculty into honors, but he's not going to meet the requirement of 2 humanities from 2 different disciplines. All his humanities are in honors. So once that was identified, I got on it right away, and we're working on a substitution. So he will graduate and graduate with honors. So hiccups can happen with all the eyes that's been on the student. I want to have a compare and contrast of the Michigan Transfer Agreement and the LSA audit checklist. Many of our degrees, but especially our liberal arts degree, is well aligned with Michigan Transfer Agreement. And you can see that there's 2 courses in composition or communications, 1 course in mathematics. Remember what I said, we have to make sure that that's a statistics course if it's going to go over to LSA. And 2 courses in social science and 2 courses in humanities. Well, you probably can't see it, but that typically is about 6 credit hours in those 2 disciplines. LSA, they want 7. So that's another place that we could identify that students could fall behind and not meet that transfer requirement. Speaking of that, also LSA has a 4-year language requirement. Most of our other institutions, transferring institutions, have a 2-semester. Even U of M Dearborn has a 2-semester requirement, but LSA has a 4-semester requirement. So as you can see, as I said earlier, the goal would be to have eyes on your students, anybody who even thinks of identifying to go into a program such as this from the very beginning of their career, their academic career. So a takeaway from this is maybe, just maybe, in a perfect world, in the future, an articulation agreement could be designed between Henry Ford College and the TB2H program. That way, the student is guaranteed to actually receive the 2-year degree. The 2-year school gets those graduation statistics for their rates, for their higher learning commission, and instead of following the transfer guides and agreements, because a lot of times, as we know, students do not earn their degree. They leave before they get a credential or a degree. So I've included in the next slide a 50-state comparison, transfer, and articulation policies that you may want to take a snapshot of that and see how your school compares with the 30 states that have policies requiring a transferable core. And also there's 17 states that have reverse transfer policies. Now that is a possibility, and that's something that many students actually, by the time they leave the 2-year school and they go on to the 4-year school, they don't really look back. So it's an option, but again, you have to meet those very specific degree requirements to get our 2-year school degree. 2018, I see it, especially because you see all the excitement that's here and all the people here and that are interested in transfer students, because this is the way, I believe, of the future. This is a way to keep education affordable. This is a way to make it so that we don't have just the highest economic strata in this country running our country. So at this time, and just well, we've really just completed 1 semester and we're into our 2nd semester. But the best thing that we have is we've developed relationships. We have people to go and speak with, refer to, and we also have partners at the different schools and colleges that we can refer the students to so they can know early on and identify early on what they need to do if that is their goal, to go to University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Thank you.
So what's next? So Henry Ford College is currently has a president who is absolutely amazing in terms of supporting our growth and movement forward as an institution with initiatives such as this. So we have full support to do pretty much whatever we want moving forward. The academic advising team recently has grown at Henry Ford College. We've added 10 new full-time advisors to our team. So this will be a great opportunity for Bridget and Sherry to bring those other academic advisors on board and train them in the ways of TB2H. We have opportunity for expanding training for our team overall. And we can open up new areas of outreach. One of the areas that I'm particularly interested in focusing on is our Detroit Promise Scholarship participation. I'm sure others have heard of a Promise Scholarship in many communities. Detroit Promise, we have 4 coaches on our campus that work with about 700 students from the Detroit Public School System. We want to make sure that we're bringing the opportunity for TB2H to that population as well. So we have a lot to look forward to. I'm very proud of all the work this group has done and the relationships that we've built along the way. And we're just looking for a lot of really good things ahead. So thank you for being here.
Okay, so I believe that these slides will be made available after the presentation, right? So you'll have everybody's contact information there. I wanted to remind people also to fill out a session evaluation. But we do have about 10 or 15 more minutes if anyone would like to ask questions about the project we've been running, and we'll see what we can do. I saw you first, and then I saw other folks too, yeah.
So first of all, thank you so much for this very nice presentation. And my name is Jing Lee. I'm from CUNY, City University of New York. And we actually have the same similar project that's sponsored by the Mellon Foundation, looking into transfers, particularly in the humanities. And since we're in New York City, African Americans and Hispanic students are the rising new majority of our student body, especially in community colleges. So what we've seen from our data is very interesting. It's a significant racial gap in terms of major selection. So compared to white students, minority students, especially male African American students, are much less likely to choose a major in humanities, both at the receiving side, at the sending side at the 2-year college, and also after they transfer to a 4-year. So I'm just wondering, because Tiffany and Bridget, you both show the demographic breakdown. So I'm just wondering, do you guys see the similar pattern in your program?
I will say I deal with a lot of parents at community college, and the parents want them to study business. And I actually happen to, technically I'm the business advisor, but I teach in the School of Liberal Arts. So yeah, so parents definitely push business, and I can tell on their faces a lot of them don't want to do that, but that's what mom and dad say. So a lot of them will start in business, but I actually see a lot of them switching into liberal arts as the longer they're here. And I know Sherry's been with the institution longer, so I'm going to hand it to Sherry, and then we'll go over to U of M real quick. Sherry, what would you say in terms of demographics for, you work a lot more closely with the liberal arts students?
I would say that I agree with you about that. One initiative that we have on our campus, correct me, but I think it's the Queens and
Black Male and Queens Focus Group, yes.
the Black Male and Queens Focus Group, and that's what it is in the humanities. It's taught by its sociology department, and so they're focusing on that group of students, and also they're cohorting courses together, math and English, to help promote the success rate of that demographic.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say really quickly is just, like, we don't have hard numbers on that information, so I don't want to speak out of turn in any sense there. But I'd say anecdotally, we don't see a ton of African American students in general. When we do see them, a lot of the students are majoring in what we like to call in our grant the humanistic social sciences. So things like psychology, sociology, anthropology, all of the ologies. But I think that's one way that our grant is trying to bring in those students and incorporate them into the pipeline, by kind of opening up, like, what is the humanities? Because the definition of that is really different at different institutions.
I think too, I just wanted to add, we have grant partners on the U of M side who specialize in helping folks with liberal arts degrees think about the career piece. And I think for a lot of students, a degree in the liberal arts feels like a scary prospect because there's not necessarily a career pathway that's conventionally thought of as the next step. And so especially if you're taking out a lot of loans or you have a family to support, something that feels like a little bit less of a guarantee can be really scary. And I know that in particular, we have a group that does sort of, I don't know how you would describe Optimize, but it's group-based collaboration. There's a lot of, they call it social innovation, but it's a chance to really pilot and fund different kinds of programs and projects. And I think for a lot of students, that can be motivating to see like, oh, these are transferable skills that I'm learning, that maybe this liberal arts degree isn't quite as limited as I thought.
And I'll just add in general, the co-curricular programs laid out in the brochure, most of them are paid or funded in a way, I did the math at one point, it's way better than a typical like part-time minimum wage job that someone might get otherwise, or your typical work-study job. So the things in there that are like the community engaged academic learning fellowship, the optimized fellowships, and then another one of our partners is the Opportunity Hub, which does like for post-graduation job coaching, but also for while you're still a student, how to get internships and those kinds of things. So that seems to help a lot. Go you, and then you, and then you. Okay, you first.
So I don't know if this can be necessarily answered, but just knowing the proximity between Henry Ford Community College, or Henry Ford College, and U of M Ann Arbor, are there similar programs that exist between HFC and U of M Dearborn? Especially considering, I guess, some of the challenges in working with the Arab community in Dearborn?
Yeah, I mean, so we have articulation agreements, and so it really is an awareness thing because, again, as they mentioned, and people have mentioned, when you say U of M and Dearborn, they assume next door. So as an advisor, we're like, are you talking Dearborn or are you talking Ann Arbor? And the assumption is Dearborn. So we have articulation agreements. U of M Ann Arbor, because it is more prestigious, maybe doesn't have those clear pathways, and different schools may accept credits differently versus U of M Dearborn. It's smaller and it is more centralized and it is next door. They're still not the easiest for transfer, but it's definitely a clearer pathway, and it's just almost assumed, I would say. Maybe not assumed, but it's always on their radar to go to U of M Dearborn because of the geographic proximity. Versus Ann Arbor, sometimes we kind of have to plant that seed for them.
And I ask only because, well, so a little bit of background, my wife actually belongs to the Arab community in Dearborn, so her family's all there still. And so even though, you know, Ann Arbor's like an hour away, it's still like a drive, and with the snow and all that, it makes things a lot more complicated. So that's why I kind of wanted to get like what y'all were doing with HFC.
I had a question for Nick about, you mentioned that you're able to go into the high schools and talk about this as a transfer program. Do you get there, in my institution, there's a line that's been created of, we only talk to high school students about freshman admission, not transfer admission, and do you get any of that pushback, and how are you able to navigate that?
That's a great question. So that was one thing we did have to navigate, and we talked with the Office of Undergraduate Admissions about from U of M. So basically, we're tag teaming with Henry Ford counselors. That is the main draw. They give the main presentation, and they say there is an opportunity through the College of LSA at the University of Michigan. So it's making that distinction that we're not encouraging them not to apply as freshmen. We're just saying that for those students who maybe aren't ready to go to U of M right off the bat, this is another option into U of M. So yeah, but we advertise it as Henry Ford College with the College of LSA from the University of Michigan. Yep.
And I'd like to add to that, because we have several programs. We have early college, we have dual enrollment, there's another one, but I'm blanking, a collegiate academy. It's important to let those high school students know early on, especially like in dual enrollment, because the courses they take, high school students like to take online courses. But if this is even just a thought in their mind, if they know early on, they know that they're going to have to take in-house classes and classes that would transfer.
I saw you, and then you. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Lexa Logue. I'm a colleague of James, and from CUNY. And I'm trying to see if I understand correctly how the
credits work. Did I understand correctly that if you're a student in the TB2H program, you commit to graduating from Henry Ford College and getting a degree? And is it the case that you could take courses at Henry Ford College that would all transfer to Ann Arbor? Could you do that?
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, towards the end of my presentation, I talked about a perfect world. In the future, possibly that might be something that could be looked at, sort of an articulation agreement, so that
But right.
Not now.
Yeah, not
No.
right now. If a student were, so first and foremost, with the program agreement, it is not a contract. So students are not necessarily saying, like, by signing this program agreement, I will get an associate's degree. Many of the students who we are going to be admitting for the fall have not completed their associate's degree yet. Some of them have. So those students that are kind of in the pipeline right now, because of where they started with the loose cohort model, some of them may be finishing, some of them may not. So just kind of throwing that out there. But like if students are planning to complete the associate's degree, there are inherently courses that just will not transfer to the University of Michigan Ann Arbor. We don't accept computer classes. We don't accept anything lower than pre-calculus. Correct, to get the associate's degree. Exactly, yes.
And is there any difference in the admissibility of a student depending on if they finish the associates or not?
So,
Is it not done? I mean, like we have at CUNY, you can have a lower GPA if you have the associates and get in than if you try to get in before.
Yeah.
So is it like that, or is it not make a difference?
so that's more of an admissions question. We don't work for admissions, so that would be.
You want me to answer that? I'm happy.
I see you, yes, that would be fantastic.
I work in admissions in Michigan.
Yeah.
So I validate all the transfer files, so make the final decision on all of them. So we don't have separate guidelines for that at all.
So you're using a holistic approach?
It's a holistic approach.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So actually, it could be to a student's advantage to transfer sooner. Yes. Yeah. Okay, just checking.
Part of my job that isn't part of this presentation on the Michigan side is trying to work with faculty and departments to get this more streamlined and develop more equivalencies and start connecting like chairs of departments to each other to talk about how they can co-design curricular alignment. But that's a whole nother.
Really quickly, if they get on this early on though, it would be about 54 out of 60 credits. Approximately. It's basically the computer and the first English, and beyond that.
First English transfers, it just doesn't count towards the requirement. You have to do the second one to count as the requirement.
Okay,
But
so 57 up to. It's just getting on it early, and that's why we're co-advising, to try and make sure we get the most possible credits to transfer.
What's the admissions criteria into the program for the students in high school, and then once they're enrolled in Henry Ford, how are they identified to join the program?
To join TB2H? Yeah, so there's no, the only requirement we have is that you're a humanities or social science major or intended major. There's no GPA really requirement. We work with them on that once they're in there.
They don't have to maintain a certain GPA?
We do say above a 3.0 because that is the minimum to apply. So we do work with them to make sure they're maintaining that.
And I'm not sure if I understand the timeline correctly. Is there a cohort of Henry Ford students at GUM now?
Not yet, no.
Yeah, so you mentioned that this is funded by a grant, and it's 3 years. So is there a plan for Ann Arbor to scale it up or continue this, projects while, the funding process?
Yes, we will apply for renewals of the grant, and other folks who have been funded through this funding area of the Mellon have gotten renewals, so we're hopeful about that. But definitely one of Michigan's goals is to identify practices that work well and that would be worth the actual institutional investment in. So the goal is to institutionalize the practices that work and say, thanks for helping us learn, Mellon, about the practices that didn't work so well. So.
Learning about your ability to market this to students and not guarantee admission. It seems like they're doing 90% of the work, and it would seem like if admissions in the college would. But I'm from Texas A&M, so I understand your concerns, trust me. I just look at this program and for what we're trying to do, grow new audiences for our university, this sounds like a wonderful idea, but I'm struggling to understand why not. I can understand that credits and college algebra, get that. Well, why not offer the ability to streamline the admissions process and guarantee to your college?
No one in this group has the power to do that, so.
To say, because it seems like you'd have a bigger audience if you were having a bigger carrot to dangle in front of them.
Just from my perspective, from a recruitment perspective, again, I wasn't in the room where that was decided, but it's certainly, because we care about trans students, it certainly doesn't alleviate their anxieties when they're applying, right? Even though they're part of TB2H, it doesn't alleviate that anxiety of, I'm going to get in or I'm not going to, right? So it is something that we will look for, but maybe down the road we can have those conversations, but right now we just tell them to interact and do as many of these high impact practice workshops that you can and talk to us, and we have admissions help, the advisors help to make sure that your application is as strong as it possibly can be at the time of the application.
There's not necessarily a cost to the student of joining, so well, maybe you all have experienced differently, but most students, it seems like they're eager for the extra guidance and opportunities and assistance. And the alternative would be that they're trying to figure it out on their own. So that seems to help a little.
I think part of the impetus around that, the timeline sheet that you all have with you, that research phase, we're trying to help students learn more about transfer as a process as well. So U of M Ann Arbor, we hope, is just one of many options that they're considering for transfer. So we're also trying to teach and advocate for the transfer process, even if it's not to U of M Ann Arbor.
Go ahead.
Just to kind of jump off that, so I'm from Case Western Reserve University. My two colleagues here are from our two-year partner, Cuyahoga Community College. We are another Mellon program. It seems like there's a lot of So we actually had our fourth cohort of students transfer to Case this past fall, and we also don't guarantee admission. We actually had a couple really bad admission years where we had to really revamp our programming. But what we're hearing from the students is that because we are actually requiring them to apply to other institutions besides us, one of the things we explain is that you need to see where the money falls, you need to see where your financial aid packages fall, and we want them to have choices. So since we actually have some cohorts now, we have absolutely had students get in and decide not to matriculate, various reasons, but yeah, it's a sticky plan. We have not been able to get the guaranteed admission thing going either.
We're out of time. Sorry.
Thank you all.
So thank you for staying 3 minutes late. Please do remember to do evaluation or take the paper one by the door if you don't want to do it online. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your time.